I do want to say I'm slideless intentionally, and also that this is sort of a Frankenstein piece from a few different things that I've published, but also a sort of longer project that I'm in the very beginning stages of about sort of techno-utopianism and dystopianism in social movements. So it's sort of comes from a few different places. So we can kind of talk more or less about the parts that are interesting to you in the question and answer session. So I will just begin. Do you mind if I just leave?
No.
Okay. Okay. In 1991, a video surfaced showing the beating of Rodney King at the hands of the Los Angeles police. This video, for many people, exposed the ongoing results of racism, routine thwarting of protocol, and the radical arbitrariness and disproportionate level of police presence, attention, and violence in Black communities throughout Los Angeles. For some, the video became an opportunity for exposure and belied a desire for an undeniable piece of visual evidence, positioning this document as somehow separate or apart from the vast documentation and experiential evidence of police violence. Even in the face of this unspeakable violence, there was both a tinge of hope that the evidence of both individual and community trauma might finally break through the rhetoric of equanimity that rang so false in the face of experience, and simultaneously a sense that this would change nothing. The 81-second video, grainy, pixelated footage, and now defunct class of media known as the home video, which some of us might remember, was shot by a plumber named George Holliday. Awakened by sirens, he had filmed the incidents with his Sony camcorder straight out of the box. Never used it before. By the following Monday, the tape had been given to KTLA, and the national news media soon picked it up. Amid the flurry of media attention, and in a rare indictment, all 4 officers involved were eventually acquitted of both assaults with a deadly weapon and use of excessive force. The video that exposed the alternate realities of living in Los Angeles according to and along racial lines spent weeks in court being frozen, frame by frame, turning action into stills, reframing and re-narrating by the police and defense attorneys, transforming the behavior represented as justifiable in the eyes of the jury. The evidence in this, as in all cases, was not the same thing to all people involved, and the account of police officers was reinforced by manipulating what had previously been situated and understood as a neutral technology. We now find ourselves in a different media sensorial moment with different kinds of documents, but many of the challenges and concerns remain the same, and to some extent with the same desire for a document that might on its own change everything. Over the last 4 years, extensive media coverage has once again brought the frequency and breadth of police violence against Black Americans into the mainstream media. This exposure is partially due to video documentation, both official, such as video taken by police officers through body or dash cams, and unofficial, such as citizen documentation, aided by the ubiquity of cell phone cameras and tapping into long-standing community collaborations and activist communities. We must take seriously the ways in which these records become evidence. Evidence of what, about what, and for whom, and how is their authority established, how is their authenticity confirmed, what kinds of future uses should we enable or guard against, and how does a continued investment in this fantasy of a disinterested technological third party ameliorate or exacerbate disparity? So in this talk, I'm just going to touch on a few of the issues that I believe challenge the information professions directly, as these records become increasingly central to the way in which police violence is understood and dealt with, or for the most part, not dealt with. So each of these issues is rhetorically situated by each constituency involved in the conversation, and it is vital to consider them in juxtaposition. The media, corporations that produce and sell body cameras and their attendant evidence management software, politicians, community activists, each frame the issue within their own set of priorities and rhetorical registers. And a casual perusal of the TASER website will show you that instead of framing police body cameras as a boon to transparency and accountability, they are framed as devices to protect police, specifically to confirm their version of events and exonerate and accuse officers. These cameras and the records they produce exist in a series of overlapping discourses, including but not limited to the economic, racial, political, medial, evidential, legal, historical, and technological. The enormous amount of attention that has been focused on body camera programs belies this kind of techno-utopian impulse, and an investment in a technological fix to a set of complex and interlocking historical and socio-political realities that goes beyond indictments of implicit bias and must contend with the co-constitutive nature of policing in America and that of slavery and the ongoing structures upholding white supremacy. With this flurry of media attention again, funding has followed. Pre-existing body camera programs have been extended, pilot programs have launched, presenting a new set of challenges for police departments whose resources cannot meet the infrastructural demands of a dramatic technological shift in a short period of time. Similarly, policies and laws regarding these devices themselves, as well as the footage they capture, have been sluggish to coalesce around any coherent principles or values. With robust policies, standardization, and enforcement for body cameras and their attendant, without robust policies and their attendant software, their potential impact could be rendered minimal at best, and at worst can work to normalize police violence and justify the status quo within a juridical setting. So none of the companies producing and selling body cameras are new to these markets for police equipment and outfitting. They were there when dash cams were considered the solution. They have developed other weapons and tools that have become ubiquitous in American policing, such as the taser. It is unsurprising then that their marketing language, design, and business model are all designed for their primary customer, police departments. Taking the two slogans of the two leading body cam companies at face value, VIEVUs being designed by cops for cops, and tasers protect life, protect truth, the values embedded in the design and implementation of every level of body camera program are most certainly geared towards the protection of both individual officers and the structural norms of policing. The design of body cameras is meant not to call attention to their presence, integrating seamlessly into existing uniforms of police officers, and all of the top-selling models leave the ability to turn the camera on and off up to the officer themselves. And some provide for visual capture but audio muting for the sake of protecting the officer's privacy. The visual capture then is assumed to be of someone whose criminality is already established, and thus their need for or right to privacy is mitigated by their criminal status, whereas the stated goal of transparency and accountability on behalf of the officer reaches its limit, pitting the overreach of the body camera as a form of workplace surveillance for police officers against the stated goal of the body camera programs in general, and at worst normalizing that police violence. Body cameras also operate within a longer history of visual evidence within the American court system. Within a legal context, authenticity is one of the primary requirements for determining admissibility in court. Before any record can be admitted into evidence, it must be authenticated by analyzing the context of record creation that is determined to be reliable, testimony, or expert judgment. The state of authentication is in flux as the complexity of technological systems, the distributed nature of documentary forms, and the relative technological expertise of involved parties leave traditional methods of assessment and determination wanting. Legal standards and expertise simply cannot keep up with technological change, and a system based on precedent is hard-pressed to develop legal standards for new systems and their forms and formats. This history of audiovisual evidence in the courtroom provides insight into this dilemma, as the introduction of new forms requires an ever-changing genealogy of analogy. For example, the history of photographic evidence in the courtroom relied on analogies to painting and drawing, as it was seen to have more in common with art form than eyewitness testimony. It is easy to see where and how these analogies might fall apart. Additionally, there is little precedent for a critical analysis of the development of particular documentary technologies in the courtroom. While there is a well-documented history of using white skin for optimization in photographic technologies, this history and critique has not been brought into a courtroom in any significant way, and has historically had little or nothing to do with the concept of legal authentication. The admissibility of audiovisual materials is generally left to a trial court's discretion, relying on similar foundation and verification standards as other forms of evidence. There is foundation for audiovisual evidence to be admitted if the person or persons who made the recording are identifiable, qualified to do the recording, if all of the speakers and figures are identified, and the equipment was functioning as intended. Functioning is important. The material may require testimony as to these issues, as well as to the chain of custody and environment in which the material was processed and preserved. The footage from body cameras is in some ways a new kind of evidential object within the courtroom, and in some ways it's not. Outside of the courtroom, it serves as evidence in multiple ways, including serving as a basis for bringing indictments against officers, as well as serving to inform the public as to circumstances of fatal shootings, or in a perverted sense, as we see in comment sections around the world, or reframing by Blue Lives Matter groups, or to justify violence for its own sake. However, the issue of equipment functioning properly has already come up in several cases, most famously in the fatal shooting of Alton Sterling. While body cameras were used, they fell off during the confrontation, rendering the footage unusable and not able to be authenticated in court. The officers involved were wearing Motorola brand body cameras secured during a pilot program for the Baton Rouge Police Department. Activist groups, public representatives, and corporate entities all expressed skepticism that the body cameras of both officers should fall off or malfunction simultaneously. Steve Tuttle, a representative for Taser, was quoted by NBC News as saying, "It's not unheard of, but it's very unusual in the overall industry and certainly isn't a significant issue for us despite 7 years of our cameras being worn by more than 3,500 law enforcement agencies." Knowing that these equipment failures do happen or can be claimed to happen leaves body camera footage subject to the same standards of admissibility as any other audiovisual evidence, requiring the establishment of foundation and authenticity. Footage kept on police agency servers or on cloud-based servers through private companies would require testimony regarding the process of collecting, copying, migrating, describing, and retrieving such footage, highlighting the potential for destruction, tampering, or inadvertent changes. The evidentiary issues go beyond this with respect to body camera footage. Beyond foundation and admissibility, it will need to be determined the ways in which juries will be instructed to weigh and consider body camera footage, including what weight will be given to the footage in instances where there is partial recording, or if a citizen requests that the officers stop recording, or if there are multiple body cameras for multiple responding officers, can each individual stand alone, or must the aggregate be considered? U.S. Attorney Ronald Machen Jr. has explicitly linked what might be considered a boon to prosecutors to the ability of local governments to adequately establish and continue to fund the effective preservation, processing, and production of this volume of recordings. This acknowledgement belies a difficult financial and infrastructure challenge for the public sector. The usefulness of these videos in the public sense requires investment beyond the capacity to secure them and includes a longer-term strategy conceiving of them as public resources. This is made all the more critical by these recent equipment failures with the camera themselves. As law, policy, and training begin to coalesce, it is vital to begin the audit trail the moment a camera is affixed, otherwise we risk body cameras becoming another surveillance tool. I would argue that it already is, but that's a different part of the paper. At will, a tool given all the more weight due to the rhetorical weight behind their implementation. The characterization that body cameras act as a technological and implicitly non-human neutral third party might allow police officers to shape the narrative of use of force incidents more than they already do. While scholars in science and technology studies, media studies, and information studies have repeatedly analyzed and broken down the persistent and hardy myths surrounding neutrality, what might be more necessary in this instance and in this time is critical attention to truth claims. Specifically, in this instance, the authority of the technological can be used to bolster and affirm the authority of the police just as easily as it might serve as a check against police officers' claims to authoritative truth. So just thinking about infrastructure and cost for a minute, the body camera itself is a relatively inexpensive piece of equipment, and Taser leads the market with their Axon body camera models. But the economic model that has emerged in the body cam market relies on the inability or disinterest of police departments to invest in infrastructure that would allow for the comprehensive data storage and management, that are a direct consequence of body camera implementation on any scale. Taser's 2 best-selling cameras are between $400 and $600 and have sold their cameras to over 5,000 police departments and agencies to date. As all information professionals are acutely aware, the real cost comes with data management and storage. And this model has yielded predominantly subscription-based evidence management software. All of this is to say infrastructure is big and inflexible, and in this instance, high in both resources and cost. To give a sense of cost here, we can look at the San Diego Police Department. They purchase cameras for just about $500 each, but will spend almost $1,500 per year per unit for video storage costs. Or we can look at Clearwater, Florida, which officials rejected a plan to outfit 170 police officers with body cameras because the program had an initial one-time cost of purchasing the cameras at around $100,000 and a recurring annual cost of $235,000. So this, of course, has been a boon for companies in the body camera business who have described the increased media coverage of police violence as a financial windfall, a naked exposure of the intimate relationship between the creation of footage of police violence and the generation of capital. A handful of police departments have attempted to keep processing and storage of police body camera footage in-house, purchasing and maintaining their own servers, and committing to maintenance costs and the uphill battle of maintenance as laws, best practices, and expectations change. One department in Clarksville, Indiana, recently shelved their body cam program that they had implemented in 2012. A new Indiana law extended the period that footage must be in storage from 30 days to 190 days. And that the original estimates for storage and maintenance costs were between $5,000 and $10,000 a year, and the new law would have bumped this estimated cost to around $50,000 to $100,000 for the first year. So it's easy to see how and why, especially from a sort of logistical standpoint, and as pressure to implement programs mounts, police departments would choose to engage private companies. And this is just one tiny piece of the sort of political economy of body camera footage. The possible abuses of police body cameras as a tool of surveillance or as a mechanism for reinforcing police officer truth claims makes their implementation at the least a misguided misdirection, and at worst a tool for deepening existing police abuse and violence in communities of color. The Stop LAPD Spying Coalition has called body-worn cameras an empty reform to expand the surveillance state that will serve to reinforce and even enhance repressive police practices. Philip Fornacci of the Campaign Against Police Abuse said in response to deployment, cameras are worn by police, so they are by definition not going to capture police conduct. They'll capture the people who they interact with. Alternately, should the financial viability of contracts with police departments become more complicated or disappear entirely, these partnerships may dissolve. As a contract ends, the financial stakes of this fact is exacerbated, as presumably current practice would then rely upon and assume that body cameras were an integral part of day-to-day policing, and therefore a pause in service would cause disruption. As of yet, no police departments or companies have stated explicit plans or strategies for migration of data should their contracts end. Police policy governing retention schedules of footage and public access to footage differ from department to department, city to city, state to state. Several issues are considered when determining retention policies, including whether all footage should be retained, what types of footage should be flagged for review and retained, the length of time that is reasonable to hold footage that has investigative or evidentiary value, the risk of citizens that a database of footage that has investigative or evidentiary value disappears, the risk to citizens that a database of footage capturing their daily lives could be a tool for unconstitutional surveillance and monitoring, and that footage can be analyzed to divergent purposes, with differing and prescribed rules for access, review, and analysis. Departments, departments, state legislatures, departments, state legislatures, and and in some cases, external regulatory bodies weigh these factors in determining, I really just have to close and reopen it. It's doing something crazy. Give me a second, guys. Sorry. It's a new computer, so tablet mode is new for me. Okay. Departments, state legislatures, and in some cases external regulatory bodies weigh these factors in determining policies, but there are still an alarming number of departments without comprehensive policies in place. Footage is typically classed as evidentiary, non-evidentiary, uncategorized, or categorized. Evidentiary footage is defined by its capture of an incident or encounter that could prove useful for investigative purposes, such as a crime, an arrest, or a citation, a search or use of force incident, or a confrontational encounter with a member of the public. And non-evidentiary is used to refer to footage that is not likely to assist in an investigation or lead to arrest or aid in prosecution. Within evidentiary footage are a multiplicity of subcategories. This is where it gets really hairy. The Wichita Police Department Policy Manual outlines footage and their respective retention schedules, including but not limited to videos that are considered helpful and suitable training aids, field interviews, incident report, non-criminal, citations of any kind, felony investigation, rape, deadly use of force, and administrative investigation. The retention schedules for these categories range from 90 days to indefinitely. The Wichita Police Department has also outlined specific guidelines and policies regarding public access to body camera footage, stating a commitment to open records and transparency and requiring those requesting footage to pay a fee in addition to any incurred redaction costs the department might incur. Redaction poses another challenge for law enforcement agencies and the public in terms of labor and cost, as public requests for information through a Freedom of Information Act request would require redacting and scrubbing the faces of any bystanders and victims from the video so as to protect their privacy. Fees for producing public records subject to request is, as many of us know, not unheard of, although it is currently rare and isolated to a handful of states in terms of police evidence. For small agencies who deal with sensitive records, the labor costs associated with records requests can affect work due to search, retrieval, and redaction. Most police departments follow state public records law when it comes to body camera footage. However, some states have introduced specific policies limiting access to these records, exempting some classes of records from public disclosure laws or defining police body camera footage as something other than a public record. In July of 2016, North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory signed legislation blocking the release of body camera and dash cam footage with extremely limited exception, citing what he saw as balancing the rights and safety of law enforcement officers against the public's right to know. McCrory stated that technology like dashboard cameras and body cameras can be very helpful, but when used by itself, technology can also mislead and misinform, which causes other issues and problems within our community. House Bill 972 specifies that body camera and dash cam footage are not considered public records under North Carolina law, and disclosure is severely limited to a person whose image or voice is in the recording or family members or representatives of a person captured in a recording. This disclosure would be limited to viewing and would forbid recording or copying of the footage, effectively limiting any circulation by the media. However problematic that may be in other ways, it might be something for us to think about. Similar bills with similar effects have been passed in both New Hampshire and Minnesota. New Hampshire classified body camera footage as public record if and only if they show use of force or show incident that precipitates arrest. Minnesota exempts most footage from public records law, but allows for citizens whose images or audio are captured to request footage and will release footage to the public if it shows use of force that results in substantial bodily harm. What is more troubling in the case of Minnesota is the segment of the law that states that footage can be redacted or withheld if it is considered to be offensive to common sensibilities, but fails to state by what standards something should be considered offensive and whose sensibilities are considered to be common. This year, Utah passed Senate Bill 94 in order to set forth policies for law enforcement use of body cameras. There were two competing body camera bills, one introduced by Senator Thatcher that attempted to classify body camera footage as a private government record if it includes images of nudity, death, or gruesome events. Although the version without this specification passed, there should be deep skepticism towards laws and policies that allow for subjective classification of footage as sensitive or bars footage from public access due to violence or offensive behavior, two descriptors that could easily bar any and all representations of police violence from public record. New York Police Department considers police body cameras an agency record and as such, subject to New York State Freedom of Information law, yet retains the discretion to withhold or redact video that is part of an active investigation or judicial proceedings if the footage could assist in the identification of confidential sources. The NYPD is unique in that it specifically identifies policy for dealing with what it calls high-profile incidents. These incidents require special attention in their need to balance the public's right to information with the integrity of any criminal investigation or criminal prosecution. The debate over whether or not body camera footage constitutes a public record is ongoing and contentious and gets to the heart of why and when different constituencies have called for their large-scale implementation. Considering body camera footage as public record understands the footage as a mechanism for police accountability and a mode for enforcing that accountability through the publicly available documentation of police labor and especially incidents of deadly force, something that police departments have actively resisted throughout their existence. There has been significant public outcry in the case of the police shooting of Sylville Smith in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Wisconsin Attorney General Brad Schimmel stated that the body camera video is just one piece of information among many sources of information. They give only a narrow and incomplete glimpse of the overall picture. I can tell you now, viewing the body camera videos will not answer all of your questions. The footage was not released, even though it is considered a public record under Wisconsin public records law. It is now not being released because it is evidence in the case against former Officer Hagan Brown. The city of Chicago infamously withheld video of the fatal shooting of Laquan McDonald until it was ordered released by a Cook County judge. One result of the activist pressure and community outrage over the suspicious circumstances of the incomplete, damaged, and potentially tampered with footage that was eventually released has been the introduction of Illinois House Bill 4355, which would change existing law to default to openness. Under this bill, any law enforcement agency that wanted to deny a FOIA request for dash cam or police body camera footage showing police violence or misconduct would have to prove that the footage constitutes one of 9 FOIA exemptions in court. The Richmond County Sheriff's Office of Augusta, Georgia, cedes open records requests to the Internal Affairs Division, attempting to keep the requests apart from officers responsible for the footage. The general order provides guidance for footage not considered evidentiary, but says nothing about footage that is considered evidentiary. Footage is consistently presented in the paradoxical state of both showing the absolute truth and needing expert testimony or explanation. I can't help but conjure memories of other public spectacles of interpretation, such as Colin Powell's infamous defense of the intelligence confirming the existence of weapons of mass destruction prior to the United States invasion of Iraq. He produced satellite photography before Congress, asserting simultaneously that the evidence couldn't be more clear, should be obvious and legible to everyone. It was in fact visually right in front of them. When pressed about the details within the photos, he qualified the statements, saying that of course these photographs required expert testimony to be interpreted correctly. And I think the police body cameras, you can see when police departments do and do not invoke that they are the absolute truth, that they show everything, or they need explanation. Visual evidence in the courtroom has always invoked these claims, right, of self-evidence while also using and needing the testimony of experts. And the boundaries of representation, the construction of the narrative is derived from an institutional context. When thinking about body-worn cameras as a technology and mode of surveillance, we must contend not only with its rhetorical uses and design elements or affordances, but also with its status in the discourse of surveillance. How do we characterize the type of surveillance that body-worn cameras enable? They are simultaneously owned and operated by the state, and in some vital sense remain unidirectional, while they are also expected to be an accountability tool acknowledging police brutality and misconduct. As such, they are also mechanisms of a form of workplace surveillance, as I said before, for police officers themselves. The timing of the call for body-worn cameras also marks their use as a strategy for the maintenance of policing practices and protocols, allowing for an illusion of the challenge to propose substantive change to policing or a movement to dismantle the criminal justice system. The body-worn camera, and this is, I'm quoting again from Sophia, already quoted this part, but it bears repeating in this context. But the body-worn camera shifts the onus of transparency and accountability from the police themselves and relocates it in a technological object. In this way, the cameras also operate as tools for controlling the emotional state and outcry of the public. Instead of indictments for individual police officers or strategies for significant structural change, we have a $75 million investment in a technological solution that is considered an end in and of itself. There are significant issues and concerns with the limits of these particular systems, since each company is selling both the camera and their attendant evidence management platforms. There are substantive questions to be raised about data ownership, specifically regarding what companies such as Taser are and are not allowed to do with the data they are storing. Technically speaking, Taser can be understood as a co-creator of the records unless explicitly stated. Therefore, each contract entered into between a law enforcement agency and an evidence management company should define in granular detail the boundaries in place concerning data. Contracts between police departments and private companies must assert the ownership of data. Considering the potential for revenue from reusing, selling, or otherwise using data culled from body cameras and other forms of digital evidence, the standards must be set in the early days of these programs. The International Order of Chiefs of Police published a report in 2013, updated in 2015, that explicitly calls attention to the issue of data ownership and data mining, asserting that law enforcement agencies should ensure that they retain ownership of all data, and that law enforcement agencies should ensure that the cloud service provider does not mine or otherwise process or analyze data for any purpose not explicitly authorized by that law enforcement agency. Cloud computing, So these issues are key within current technological context, but are especially important for longer contracts that might see the development of newer technologies, and without foresight may not adequately deal with their potential implementation. In July of 2016, Taser announced that it had plans to unveil live streaming capabilities in 2017 and expects that facial recognition will not follow suit. Kind of blew my mind that they said that publicly. So anyway. As of August 2016, not a single city has prohibited the use of facial recognition technologies on police body camera footage collected by officers. Facial recognition scans for unique facial features, identifying the constellation of those features as a face print, with the assumption that one could match the face print by scanning through a pre-existing database. Law enforcement is no stranger to facial recognition through their own photo databases, but also through collaboration with other agency and civilian databases, such as the Department of Motor Vehicles. In a report from the Center on Privacy and Technology at Georgetown Law enforcement use of facial recognition is described as relatively unregulated and significantly different than other means of biometric data gathering. Whereas fingerprints and DNA are typically collected in criminal investigations, facial recognition comes predominantly from civilian populations, as if those two are entirely separate. This is an ability that expands drastically within the implementation of body cameras, as the footage can capture bystanders and victims in addition to police officers on duty. Taser has rapturously spoken of their unprecedented access to data. Luke Larson, the president of Taser International, has said, "We've leveraged a weapon to introduce a camera, and we've leveraged the camera to introduce evidence.com. This is really, really awesome because no one else in the world is going to capture the data that we capture. I mean, the possibilities are endless." The company vision Taser has for integration makes its technologies synonymous with policing, integrating existing components including license plate readers and automated transcription. This is why deletion, ownership, and retention are so fundamental. As these companies become more and more deeply embedded with policing practices, the retention of data lies beyond issues of security and authenticity and harkens to the techno-dystopic, in which privacy concerns and unprecedented tracking of citizens by law enforcement is automized. Taser has also come under fire for the relative cost of their storage services, which can be up to 23 times the cost of storage offered through Amazon Web Services. The centrality of technologies of visuality to projects of social control foreground the importance of control over these representational methods as well as data. Time and again, citizen documentation and photography become characterized as criminal, while the acts they capture do not. This power is bolstered by an investment in the neutrality of technologies of surveillance and is simultaneously reinforced by the depiction of victims of police brutality as emotionally volatile and transgressive. Concurrent to the rise in video documentation from the vantage point of police, there has been a rise in the use by activists of video and other methods of observation in order to create their own evidence and counter-narratives. In the wake of the Rodney King video, LA CAN, the Los Angeles Community Action Network, began using video documentation. This grassroots organization made up of homeless and low-income Skid Row residents generates such video for use in lawsuits against the LAPD, as well as defense against police harassment and brutality. LA CAN has developed a series of interactional filming strategies designed specifically to limit the possibility of retroactive alternative explanations for events, creating boundaries around its evidential potential beforehand. Over the past few years, several cases that have garnered massive media attention and protest, including the choking death of Eric Garner, the death of Walter Scott, the death of Freddie Gray, relies not on the footage from police body camera, but from camera phone video taken by observers and bystanders. Although it is legal to record interactions with the police, and any confiscation of footage or materials would require a warrant, police frequently destroy, confiscate, or deter citizens from documentation. A person also runs the risk of becoming embroiled in a legal matter of their own. Ramsey Orta, as Sophia mentioned earlier, the man who filmed the choking death of Eric Garner, came under intensive police scrutiny upon the release of his video. Tiara Venable was arrested and booked while filming protests in the aftermath of the death of Freddie Gray. Initially booked as female, she was transferred to an all-male facility when the central booking authorities discovered she was a transgender woman. Denied access to her routine health care and medication, and saddled with an inordinately high bail, Venable was subject to interminable harassment by the authorities until community efforts raised the funds to meet her bail requirements. Apps developed by the ACLU and Duncan Kirkwood's Hands Up for Justice allow a user to connect with a third party for storage, backup, and authentication purposes. These videos circulate predominantly through corporately owned social media platforms such as Facebook and YouTube. Most recently, Facebook played a central role in the deaths of Corinne Gaines in Baltimore and Philando Castile in St. Paul. When police arrived at Corinne Gaines' apartment to serve an arrest warrant, a standoff ensued as police claimed Gaines met them with threats and a shotgun. In order to counter the police narrative of the encounter, Gaines began streaming video through Facebook Live and posting videos to Instagram. Quickly, the Baltimore police used the Facebook police portal to shut down her accounts and remove the majority of the videos. In the case of Castile, his girlfriend Diamond Reynolds streamed through Facebook Live, documenting the fatal encounter during a traffic stop. The footage was taken down and reappeared only under pressure. As Jarrett Drake has pointed out, and we might draw this parallel to the evidence management software discussed as well, this pattern gives us a window into the relationships between law enforcement and tech companies that afford Silicon Valley an uninformed and unexamined privilege in matters of managing content depicting police violence. The police can offload the labor of confiscating or disabling video capabilities through corporate partnership. We also know that Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram provided Chicago-based company Geofedia access to their user information that helped law enforcement agencies monitor activists of color. An investigation by the ACLU discovered emails revealing Geofedia's special access to social media data. The result we have at the moment is that resources activists have gone to create create counter-narratives and establish evidence that comes directly from their own experience is itself also compromised and contingent upon models of profitability. Although archives have worked to dispense some of the myths of neutrality over the last 10 to 20 years, we are still contending with this legacy, and these assumptions have shaped the relationships between our profession and public institutions. And it isn't enough to advise the president on presidential records law and hope he acts accordingly, and it's not enough to think of our intervention in issues such as police body cameras as after the fact. And so I'll end with the words of Rachel Matson, as she says, it's not enough to wait for the records to come to us.